The last time the Pacific Ocean settled into the pattern it's drifting toward right now, the harvest didn't fail in one country. It failed across 3 continents in the same year. That was 1877. And the reason that matters to your backyard has almost nothing to do with the weather. Most of the coverage you'll see about the El Niño forecast files it as a weather story. A wet winter here, a dry one there, something for reservoir managers to worry about. It isn't really a weather story. It's a food story. And if you've stood in the grocery aisle this year and felt like the prices weren't just high, but jumpy, unsteady, moving in a way they didn't used to, you've already felt the early edge of it. Here's the quiet thing underneath the whole modern food system.
It assumes the world's big growing regions have their bad years separately, that when wheat struggles in one country, there's always a surplus somewhere else to cover it. El Niño is the one force that can break that assumption. It can pull those regions down together. But here's the part the news won't tell you, and it's the reason I'm not worried in the way they'd like you to be. Your backyard doesn't trade on the world market. It doesn't care what the Pacific decides. You don't have to out-forecast an ocean. You just have to plant the things that hold up no matter what kind of year it turns out to be. So that's what this is. 12 crops sorted into 4 groups. First, the Drought Hardeners, the ones that keep producing on water that would stall everything else.
Then the heat refusers, the ones that get going right when a July heat wave shuts the rest of the garden down. Then the storage staples, the crops that fill a pantry and hold for months with no freezer and no canning. And last, the fail-safes, the fast, forgiving ones that put something on the table even if the whole season comes apart. One crop in that storage group carried families through actual famines, and most American gardeners today have never once planted it. I'll point it out when we get there. And right at the end, after the 12th crop, I'll show you the one thing I do with every single plant on this list. It isn't a plant, it's a planting habit, and it's the real insurance policy. I've never spelled it out in a video before. We'll start in the driest corner of the garden, with the crop that turns a small patch of poor ground and almost no water into more food than nearly anything else you can grow. If you only have room and water for 1 calorie crop in a hard year, this is the one I'd plant first. The sweet potato, Ipomea patatas, produces more food per square foot on less water than almost anything you can put in the ground. I learned how tough it is by accident. A few years back, I ran out of hose before I got to the far bed, and I figured the sweet potatoes were finished. August came in dry and hot, the kind of dry where the ground cracked. I left them. In October, I put a fork under that bed almost out of guilt, and they came tumbling out, more than I'd have gotten from a bed I'd babied all summer. The reason is the plant itself. It's tropical. Heat is its home weather, not its enemy. Once the vines take hold, the roots run deep enough to find moisture long after the surface has gone hard. And the vines aren't a side effect. The young leaves are an edible green, so a single planting feeds you twice. Here's the part I got wrong for 2 seasons. I dug them and ate them the same week, and I couldn't understand why they didn't keep. Sweet potatoes have to be cured, about 10 days somewhere warm and humid, before they go into storage. Skip the curing, and a crop that should hold all winter starts going soft in a month. And that's really the whole promise of this video in one plant. You are not trying to predict the season. You're planting things that have already survived worse seasons than the one being forecast. And the next 2 only push that idea further. The sweet potato shrugs off a dry spell. The next crop does something a step beyond that. It produces protein in conditions that kill an ordinary bean outright. The cowpea, Vigna ungulata, the same plant you may know as the black-eyed pea, is a protein crop that keeps setting pods in heat and drought that would leave a regular green bean flowering and dropping everything. It comes out of West Africa. Heat and dry soil are the conditions it was bred in over thousands of years, so a July that stalls your other beans is just an ordinary working day for a cowpea. And it gives back more than it takes. Like other legumes, cowpeas pull nitrogen out of the air and fix it into the soil through their roots. Plant cowpeas in a tired bed this year, and you've quietly fed whatever you grow there next year. The clever part is that one planting does 2 jobs depending on when you pick. Harvest the pods young, and you've got a fresh shelling pea for the table this week. Leave those same pods on the plant to dry down brown and brittle, and you've got a dried bean for the shelf. One crop, 2 answers, a fresh meal or a stored one. If you garden somewhere genuinely arid, high desert, true low rainfall country, there's an even tougher cousin worth knowing, the tepary bean, Phaseolus acutifolius, grown in the dry southwest for centuries precisely because it produces where almost nothing else will. From a crop that survives dry heat, we move to one that turns the same heat into a harvest twice over. Amaranth gives you 2 crops from one plant, and it does it in heat and drought that flatten most gardens. Grain amaranth, varieties of amaranthus, often Amaranthus cruentus, produces tender, edible greens while it's young, then sends up a tall seed head that gives you an actual grain. Picture it, a row of plants, chest high by late summer, topped with seed heads in deep red and gold, heavy enough to nod over.
That's a lot of food standing in a bed that needed very little from you. It thrives in heat for a real botanical reason. Amaranth photosynthesizes through a pathway built for hot, bright, dry conditions. Where a cool season green bolts and turns bitter, amaranth is just settling in. One identification note, because it matters. Amaranth is a close relative of the wild plant many people know as pigweed, so it'll look familiar. Broad leaves, that big plume of a seed head. For grain, you want a named cultivated grain amaranth variety, not a volunteer from the fence line, and you'll harvest the heads once the seed rubs free easily in your hand. That's the drought group, 3 crops that don't flinch at a dry spell. Now the season doesn't just go dry, it goes hot.
And the next 3 crops don't tolerate heat, they wait for it. Okra, Abelmoschus esculentus, does its best work in exactly the week your tomatoes give up. When a heat wave settles in and the rest of the garden goes quiet, okra is producing hardest. There's a stretch of most summers here where the tomato vines just stop, too hot to set fruit, leaves curling by mid-afternoon. That same week, I'm out at the okra every other day with a basket, because if I'm not, I've missed the window. It's a tropical plant. Real heat is its growing season, and it'll keep cropping for months once it starts. So why do so many people say they don't like okra? Almost always, it's a timing mistake. Pick the pods small, finger length, while they still snap easily, and pick often.
Let them get long and fat on the plant, and they turn woody and tough, and one bad pod sours a whole opinion of the crop. Small and frequent. That's the entire secret. Okra handles the heat standing up. The next crop handles it as a leafy green, which is the harder trick, because heat is what destroys most greens. By midsummer, true spinach is a memory. Bolted, bitter, gone. Malabar spinach, Bacella alba, is the green that takes its place, and it actually thrives in the heat that finished off the spring crop. It isn't a true spinach at all. It's a tropical vine with thick, glossy leaves, and it'll happily climb a string or a short trellis through the hottest part of the year, giving you mild greens the whole time. The texture is slightly thick and a little slippery. That's normal for the plant. Use the youngest leaves raw in a salad, or cook the rest like spinach, and that quality simply disappears into the dish. For a family that wants something fresh and leafy on the plate in August, when the idea of a salad green feels almost impossible, Malabar spinach quietly solves it, and it keeps solving it. A single healthy vine can produce leaves continuously for months, well into the first cool nights of fall from one spring planting. That's heat handled as a green. The last crop in this group is the one most gardeners already grow, and it's heat tolerant in a way that's easy to take for granted. Peppers, Capsicum annuum, or a warm season crop that holds up through heat that punishes a lot of the garden. And they give you something most vegetables don't, a clean path into storage. A row of peppers ripening through a hot spell is one of the steadier sights in a summer garden. They're working when the conditions are working against most other things. I'll be honest about one limit because it's a real one. In genuine extreme heat, long stretches well into the triple digits, sweet peppers can drop their blossoms and pause fruit set. A bit of afternoon shade gets sweet types through it. Hot peppers are tougher and tend to push through regardless. And here's the storage payoff. Hot peppers and many sweet ones dry beautifully. A string of peppers drying by a window turns a fresh summer crop into a shelf-stable one you'll be cooking from in February. Now, these first 6 crops don't grow in isolation. What you plant beside them changes how well they do, which neighbors share nutrients, which shade which quietly compete.
That's a whole subject on its own, and it's the one I wrote a book about, Veggie Matchmakers, because I needed the answers laid out in one place myself. If you want to go deeper on which plants protect which, the link's in the description. That's heat handled. Growing food in a hard year is one half of the problem. Holding on to it through the months when nothing is coming out of the ground is the other half. These next 3 crops are the pantry.
Winter squash, and I'd point you specifically at butternut, Cucurbita muscata, is calorie-dense food that stores for 3 to 6 months on an ordinary shelf. No freezer, no canner, just a shelf. There's a particular quiet in walking past a row of squash on a shelf in December, knowing each one is a meal that's been waiting there since October. That's what this crop is for. The hard rind is the whole mechanism. It's a natural seal that protects the flesh for months. And butternut pipe squash has a second advantage worth knowing. Those muscata varieties tend to shrug off the squash vine borer better than other types, which is the pest most likely to take a squash plant down mid-season. The mistake I made early on was carrying them straight from the vine to the shelf.
Winter squash needs to cure first, about 10 days to 2 weeks somewhere warm, to harden that rind fully. Skip it, and a squash that should last till spring starts to go soft by Thanksgiving. Squash fills the shelf. The next crop fills the jar, and it's the one I promised you at the start. This is the crop I told you about in the first minute, the one that carried families through actual famines, and the one most American gardeners have never grown. Dry beans, Phaseolus vulgaris, the same species as your green beans, just grown all the way to the end. A jar of dried beans is protein that stores for years, not months, and the growing is almost embarrassingly simple. You grow them like green beans, and then instead of picking, you wait.
Think back to where this video started. 3 continents, 1 bad year. The reason dried beans mattered so much through hard history is that they don't spoil, and they don't need a cold room. A family with shelves of beans had a buffer that a bad season couldn't reach. You let the pods dry right on the plant until they're brown and brittle, and the beans rattle inside. Then you shell them. And there's a real satisfying sound to a bowl filling with dry beans at the kitchen table. The one thing to watch, beans need a dry stretch at the end of the season to finish drying down on the plant. If your fall turns wet, pull the whole plants and finish them under cover, a porch, a shed, because beans brought in damp will mold in the jar. Beans store for years. The last pantry crop stores for months, and it's pure calories. Potatoes, Solanum tuberosum, are one of the best calorie returns per square foot in the whole garden, and they hold for months in a cool, dark spot. I want to be straight with you about one thing, because this is a video about hard, hot years, and potatoes are not a heat crop. They prefer cooler soil. So the move is timing. Plant them early so the tubers bulk up before the worst of the heat arrives. In genuinely hot regions, treat potatoes as a spring and fall crop, not a summer one. Worked with the calendar instead of against it, they earn their place in the pantry. One safety note that's worth saying plainly. If stored potatoes are exposed to light, they turn green, and the green parts develop a compound you don't want to eat. The fix is simple. Store them in the dark and cut away any green before cooking. A cardboard box in a closet does the job. That's the pantry. Squash on the shelf, beans in the jar, potatoes in the box. Now the last group. Because even with everything we've covered, a season can still go sideways in a way nobody planned for. These 3 crops are the answer to that. The ones that give you something almost no matter what. The radish, Raphanus sativus, is the fastest reassurance in gardening. Food on the table in around 3 to 4 weeks from seed. That speed is the whole point. When a planting fails, and in a hard year something will, a radish lets you recover fast. Sow into the gap, and you're harvesting again before a slower crop would even be up. What goes wrong with radishes? Heat. Grown into hot weather, they turn woody and unpleasantly sharp. So grow them in the cooler shoulders of the season, spring and fall, and sow a short row every couple of weeks instead of all at once. That way there's always a young, mild batch coming. A radish won't carry your winter, but it will fill a hole in 3 weeks, and in a broken season, fast food from the ground is worth a lot. The radish gives you something quick. The next crop gives you something that simply does not stop. Swiss chard, Beta vulgaris is the green that won't quit.
It handles heat far better than spinach. It takes a light frost on the other end, and it produces for months from a single planting. The way it works is cut and come again. You take the outer leaves, and the plant just refills from the center. I've cut from the same chard plants from late spring straight through to the first hard frost, and they barely seem to notice. One row of chard, harvested that way, can keep a family in fresh greens for the better part of 6 months. Very few vegetables give you that kind of run from one sowing. The only rule? Take the outer leaves and leave the growing center alone. Strip the middle out and you've stopped the engine. Cut the outside and it just keeps going. Chard never stops.
The last crop barely seems to know how. It's the most productive plant most gardeners ever grow. Summer squash, zucchini and its relatives, cucurbita pepo, is for most gardeners the surest you will get food crop there is. It's fast, it's forgiving, and it is almost aggressively productive. Every gardener who's grown it knows the moment, lifting a leaf and finding the zucchini you missed, now the size of a forearm. That's the Wren joke of summer squash. But sit with what the joke is actually telling you. This is a plant whose main failure mode is too much food. In a video about hard years, that's not a punchline. That's the point. A couple of healthy plants will outproduce a family of 4.
Pick 'em small and often, the way you would okra, and keep an eye out for the vine borer at the base of the stems. And honestly, the real mistake with summer squash isn't a pest or the weather. It's planting 6 when 2 would have buried you. Plant fewer than you think you need. That's the 12. Drought hardeners, heat refusers, storage staples, and fail-safes, a garden that doesn't need to know what the Pacific is going to do. But there's one more thing, and it's the thing I most wanted to give you. Think back one last time to how this started. 1877 didn't become a catastrophe because one region had a drought. It became one because the regions failed together, all at once, with no good year anywhere to lean on. Now look at how most people plant a garden. They take a crop and they put the whole thing in on a single Saturday. Every sweet potato slip, every bean, every squash, one day, one batch. And what that means is the entire crop is now living the exact same 2 weeks of weather. If one bad stretch lands on those 2 weeks, a heat spike, a dry spell, a late storm, it doesn't take part of that crop, it takes all of it. You've made your own backyard into 1877 in miniature. So here is the habit I use on every single crop on this list. I never plant a crop all at once. I plant it in waves, 2 or 3 sowings, 2 to 3 weeks apart. The drought beans, the chard, the squash, the radishes, all of it, staggered. It costs you nothing but a little patience, and it changes everything. Because now no single bad fortnight can reach your whole harvest. The worst it can do is catch one wave. The others are at a different stage, on different weather, out of reach. You've done for your own garden exactly what the world's food system forgot to do for itself. You've made sure your bread baskets don't all roll the dice on the same day. I learned this the hard way, the year a single hot, dry week in June caught every bean I owned at the flowering stage, and I brought in almost nothing. I've planted in waves ever since. It's the closest thing to an insurance policy a garden has. If you're building a backyard that can feed your family steadily, through a good year and a strange one both, that is exactly what this channel is for. Subscribing is how the next one finds you.
And I'd genuinely like to know, out of those 4 groups, which one is your garden weakest in right now? The drought hardeners, the heat refusers, the storage staples, or the fail-safes? Tell me the group in the comments. I read them, and the pattern in your answers tells me what to build next. So you now know what to plant so a hard year can't empty your table. But here's the next problem that opens up, and most people hit it in their 2nd or 3rd season. A backyard that can feed you is one thing. A backyard that also pays you back, that turns $10 of seed into real money at the kitchen table, is a different problem entirely, and it's one you can solve on the same patch of ground. I made a video on exactly that, 9 backyard crops ranked by what they actually return. If this one was about not going hungry, that one's about getting ahead. It's the one I'd watch next. The link's on screen now. The forecast will say what it says, but a full shelf in the dark doesn't argue with the news. It just sits there, quiet, already enough.